إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون صدق الله العظيم أما بعد. We begin by praising Allah, our Creator, our Sustainer. We praise Him, we ask for His help in everything that we do in this life, and we ask Allah for forgiveness for all the mistakes that we've made. We declare as Muslims that nobody deserves to be worshipped besides Allah, and we declare that Muhammad was a last and final prophet and messenger sent for our guidance and the guidance of all people until the end of time. Respected brothers and sisters, there is a surah in the Quran that we recite perhaps on a regular basis, something that most people in this room probably have memorized. In fact, probably most Muslims in the entire world, out of the 1.7 billion of them, most of them who've reached the age of maturity probably have this surah memorized, because they usually tend to memorize the last 10 or 20 surahs of the Quran. This is a universal thing. And it's important that when we memorize things, and it's important that when we constantly recite things, we should not neglect to reflect upon the deeper meaning behind these surahs, because it can become so commonplace to recite something that we know and we recite it on a regular basis, but we don't always give it deep thought. So I want to reflect upon one of those surahs today, and that is Surah At-Takathur. Surah At-Takathur, which begins with Alhaakum At-Takathur. Many people have it memorized, but let's look at it on a deeper level. Let's look at it in terms of what scholars of tafsir, of the explanation of the Quran, have said, and let's see how it applies to our lives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins, after Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, says, Alhaakumut takathur. Alhaakum means it distracts you. Something diverts you, it distracts your attention away from something else. If you think about this idea, many of us were distracted in our daily lives. With all the technology that we have, with all these fancy gadgets and watches and text messaging devices and everything, every single time somebody sends you a text message or there's a update on your social media post and you get one of those notifications because you clicked yes when they said, do you want this app to give you notifications? Now you start to suffer because you get all these update notifications and you're tempted to go and look and see, what did so-and-so say? Or who liked my latest post, or who shared a new Snapchat video. And actually, what psychologists are telling us now is that all these notifications and these distractions in our mind, they actually make us distracted people. It's actually having an effect on people in their daily life, that they're constantly getting interrupted with some type of message, whether it's at work, someone talking to you, or someone calling you, or someone messaging you. It interrupts you and it distracts your attention away from what you are actually doing, and it takes time and effort to refocus your attention back onto the important thing that you were doing in life. From the reason for which we were created, something is distracting us. What is that thing which is distracting us? He says, At-Takathur. Alhaakum At-Takathur. What does takathur mean? It means wanting or striving after an abundance of material possessions, or an abundance of worldly goods. Takathur comes from the word kathir, which means a lot, or the word kathra, which means plenty. But takathur is, you see, in the Arabic language, there are 15 forms that a verb can take. And this is verb form number 6, which is called tafa'ul, on the pattern of tafa'ul. Takathur, it doesn't simply mean that you want to have a lot of something, but it implies in this verb pattern that there are two groups of people, not two. So it's saying, from what? It distracts you away. It's criticizing here. And if you look at the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Hatta zurtumul maqabir. This is until you visit the graves. That's the literal translation. Allah is basically saying this distraction is, and it was not in your best interest. There will come a day after you've died and you're resurrected and you see the reality, you will know that this, what we just said, was true. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said was true. Because you know what happens? What happens is we can read these things in the Quran, and we believe in the Quran. We say, alhamdulillah, I'm a believer, I believe in the Quran. We can read it, we can understand knowledge-wise. You say, okay, that's information that went in, I understand that this is what we're supposed to believe in, that's the reality. But oftentimes you listen to a khutbah, you listen to a lecture, and it's kind of like almost it goes in one ear, it goes out the other. It kind of goes over people's heads. It doesn't really stick. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's telling us so many things in the Quran. And when it comes to this, He doesn't want to just leave it and say, you know what guys, you need to be careful. You need to be careful that this world will distract you away from the next world. So that's a fact that Allah is telling you. He says, I want to make sure this goes down and into people's hearts and they understand it. So He says, Kalla sawfa ta'lamun. No, indeed, you will know that this is true. And then after emphasizing it one time, He emphasizes it a second time. And He says, Thumma kalla sawfa ta'lamun. He says, again, I'm going to say it one more time. You will know that this thing, that this rivalry, that this desire to have more and more distracted you away from your purpose in life. So you have to be on extra guard. You have to be extra careful about this. And then He says, كَلَّا لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عِلْمَ الْيَقِينِ. So indeed, you will know with ilm al-yaqeen. You will know with certainty. You will know with absolute knowledge when this thing happens. Right? When this thing happens, what does this mean? It means, كَلَّا لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عِلْمَ الْيَقِينِ. Sorry. The translation is, indeed, if you knew with certain knowledge. If you had certain knowledge. The low is an if. So what is it referring to? It's referring to, if you knew with absolute certainty that this is the reality of the world, then you wouldn't have allowed yourself to become distracted. You wouldn't have fallen into this. So if you had certain knowledge that you're going to be held responsible in front of Allah in the hereafter for all the things that you have, then you wouldn't allow this to to distract you away, and you would be able to have that balance in life and be able to focus on the things that you need to focus on. What is this ilm al-yaqeen referring to? This ilm al-yaqeen, this certain knowledge, this correct understanding is the highest degree of knowing. And this is something that we generally do not have in our life, because most people, they say that, well, what I can see is the certainty. Can we see God? No. Can we see paradise in this life? No. Can we see the hellfire? No. But do we have good reasons for believing in these things? Absolutely. And what happens is, when we have information coming from very reliable sources telling us about, you know what, let's say you've never been to Hawaii before, and you say, Hawaii is such a beautiful place, and it looks like this, and they're describing all the things, and you have 100 people telling you the same thing, and you say, you know what, this is amazing, you know, this is, you're getting a picture in your mind, but then when you actually see it, and if it is the way that it was described, it hits you on a totally different level. It makes something completely different happen to you, because now you see it with a different sense of certainty in your mind. You believe the people, but now it's a different level of understanding. And what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying is that when you see that, when you see the next life, once this life is over, when you see what's taking place, that's when it'll click right there, and you start to realize, oh, this was more real than I had understood. And He says, if you were able to have that certainty in this life, that level of certainty, then you would never allow this thing to distract you. But the thing is, we're not going to have this level of certainty. If you think about that, there's so many things we can look back on, right? If somebody told you 20 years ago that the stock market in the United States of America is going to be at what it is in the 20,000s, right? The Dow or whatever. Somebody told you that real estate in Southern California is going to be at this level 20 years ago, and they told you, and you really 100% believe them, you would not have hesitated to invest a lot more money into that. If you could somehow go back in a time machine and all of a sudden redo this whole thing, and you knew exactly what the amount's going to be now, you would have completely invested as much as you possibly can, because you know what the benefit would be. And this is exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, is that this is a reality because Allah is telling you. This you investing for your next life is extremely important, and you will get the rewards. But why don't we do it as much as we should be doing it? We're all guilty. I'm guilty of this too. We're all guilty. But what is Allah telling us? He's telling us is because of your level of yaqeen, your level of certainty about the things that you're being told is not connecting in your heart. It's not there yet. So people ask, well, why am I not, following the commands of Allah, and how can I become a better Muslim, and what's wrong with me? Why do I feel lazy? Why do I feel stingy? Why don't I want to donate? It has to do with ilm al-yaqeen. It has to do with the amount of certainty that you have in this life about the message of Islam. It has to do with the level of certainty when you hear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling you this advice, telling you, don't let this thing distract you away. What level of certainty do you have in these words? This is where the problem lies. This is where the ultimate root issue is. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, after He says, كَلَّا لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عِلْمَ الْيَقِينِ, He says, لَتَرَوُنَّ الْجَحِيمِ. You will see the fire. It's referring to the people who allowed themselves to be distracted. The people who did not heed the warning from Allah. He says, those people, speaking to them, you will see the fire of hell because of the punishment of you not doing, of you getting distracted. ثُمَّ لَتَرَوُنَّهَا عَيْنَ الْيَقِينِ. And you will see it with certainty, with the eye of certainty. And then He says, ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. And He says, and then you will be asked about all the delights, all the enjoyments, all the pleasures that you had in this life, and you will have to be held accountable in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of these things. So what does that mean? What are you going to be asked about? All the things that we have in this life. I want you to just reflect upon the things that we have. I was reading something written by someone. He says, take the average college student. A college student who has very little money, is barely getting by. They're on some loans or something like that. They can barely pay for all of these things. He says, if you think about them and you look at the luxuries that they have an apartment if they're living on campus or they're living with their parents at home. So they have an apartment. They have air conditioning. They have heat, or they have heat when it's cold. They have running water. That's hot running water and cold running water. They have internet. They have television. They have phones. Sometimes with the data plan, unlimited data plan, 4G, LTE, whatever it is. They have tools to cook. They have over-the-counter medicines for any type of ailment that comes their way. They could just go and pop a, paracetamol, or what is it called, acetaminophen, all of these things. They can just take some of these medicines. They can afford almost all of these things. And he says, if you think about this idea, if you look historically throughout, since the beginning of human civilization on earth, how many people have had these type of luxuries? If you calculate all human beings that have lived, we're in the top 1 percentile. This college student, just as an example, who's poor and say, I don't really even have anything and I'm struggling and all of that, they're literally in the top 1 percentile of the entire human population in terms of luxury and standard of living, if you look at it from a universal perspective. Top 1%. And when somebody complains, and they say, it's so unfair and I don't have this and I wish I had more and all that, basically what they're saying is, it's almost like saying that student who got 99% on their exam, they're the one who's complaining and saying, why couldn't I have gotten 99.01%? Why couldn't I have been elevated one standard higher? Right? And if you think about it from that perspective, it seems ridiculous. Right? This person is complaining and they have so many luxuries. And that's exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us here in the Quran, that on that day, on the day of judgment, we're going to be asked about each and every single one of the luxuries that we have. One day, this is an authentic hadith, one day the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he goes outside in the city of Medina and he sees Abu Bakr and Umar sitting down in the heat. So he says, what are you guys doing here? Why are you sitting here? And he says, the only thing that got us out here is that we were so hungry and we have no food to eat, we have no food in our home, so we're sitting here and we're hoping that someone will maybe give us some food. This is Abu Bakr and Umar. Right? They had come to Medina and they had left all their possessions behind in Mecca, most of them. So they didn't have any food to eat. So the Prophet ﷺ, and they said, what are you doing here? And the Prophet ﷺ said, the same thing which brought you here brought me here. I don't have any food in my house. This is the messenger of Allah. He says, I don't have any food in my house, and I came out looking for some food as well. So they sat down, and they were waiting for someone to hopefully get them some food. So what happens? Finally, they find one of the people from the Ansar, from the people of Medina, and he takes them into their home, and he starts to get them some food, and he goes and picks some dates. He goes and grabs a knife, he slaughters a sheep, he cooks the sheep, he brings it, and he offers them a meal. While they're eating this meal, and they're enjoying, and this is considered to be like a luxury, right? Now they have a sheep being slaughtered is considered to be really a big luxury in that society, right? Because the whole animal got sacrificed, not just a few dates or something. So the Prophet ﷺ, he told Abu Bakr and Umar, he said, I want you to remember that this is from the luxuries that we're going to be asked about on the Day of Judgment. Can you think about that? The idea of they went out not having any food in their home. And he says, now we're coming back with this beautiful, nice meal, and we're completely full, and this is like a really nice meal. He said, this is one of the luxuries in life that we're going to be asked about. Now, what does it mean you're going to be asked about these things? The first and most important thing is that we have to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for every single thing that we have. And no matter how much we thank Him, we cannot thank Him enough, because every single thing that we've been given, think about how many times, if after every single prayer, if you thanked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 10 times after every single prayer, that makes 50 times. If you think about how many luxuries we have, how many things we've been given, just the fact that our digestive tract, my stomach got messed up a little bit yesterday, when fasting and all that, and it can be painful. Every time you're ill, something happens to your body, you realize what blessing you have, just the fact that you can digest food properly. The fact that if you can just walk, when you stub your toe and you're not able to walk, or you break your foot or something like that, you break your arm and you're in a cast for 6 months, you start to realize what blessing you've been given. But then we begin to take it for granted again. We have everything, the ability to talk, the ability to function, the ability to move. In addition to that, we have nice air conditioning. We have electricity to be able to see without having light inside the building. All of these things are luxuries. And if we thanked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala every single day, we would still not be able to thank Him for everything we have. So the first responsibility is to at least start to thank Allah for each of the things that we've been given. The big things and the small things, but at least the big things. At least the really important things, we should start to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. That's one of the first things we need to do. The second thing we need to do is we need to reflect upon how we're spending those things. What are we doing with those things? Yes, we're allowed to spend on our own luxuries in this life. Alhamdulillah, we have an example in the Prophet ﷺ. The example that he left us is that he used to eat good tasting food. He did, if he wanted to, he could have said, no sweet food, no tasty food, just eat really raw, dry, food that doesn't taste good. There are people who have different religions and all of that. They tell people to do this for their spiritual, exercise or something like that. But we don't have that example in Islam. We're allowed to eat tasty food. We're allowed to buy some possessions for ourselves. We're allowed to wear nice clothes. We don't have to wear tattered, ragged clothes or something like that, because this was not the way of the Messenger of Allah. This is not the way of Islam. So we're allowed to engage in those luxuries, but at the same time we have to remember that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility in a number of ways. And the first and most important way is the minimum threshold that Allah has set for us. And that is, if that people have a certain amount of wealth, let's move up inshallah ta'ala, let's move and fill in the gap. And fill in on this side inshallah. The bare minimum has been set, and it's called zakah, and it's a pillar of Islam. And zakah is, in a nutshell, 2.5% of a person's savings. So let's say they have $5,000 saved in the bank, they have to pay 2.5% of that money. And they have to give it out to the poor, or in certain causes. But that's the bare minimum. We have to understand that that is the bare minimum, right? I keep on getting people asking me questions. We have to get out of this mentality of that, the only thing we're willing to spend for the cause of Allah is zakah. 2.5% is like the cap. So people come and ask, they say, hey, this organization over there, is that a zakah eligible organization? Can I give my zakah there? And if you say, no, that organization is not zakat eligible because they're doing some other work and it's helping the Muslim community, but it's not going just to the poor specifically. I said, oh, okay, I'm not going to donate to them. Is that mosque zakat eligible? I said, no, the mosque is not zakat eligible. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm not going to be donating then. Can you find me a mosque that is zakat eligible so I can donate to them? What basically someone is saying is, I'm not willing to give any of my money outside of the bare minimum that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set for me for any other type of project or any other type of thing that's going on. And that's the definition of that's like the bare minimum line between stinginess or something that's considered haram and you just met your obligation. That's like the D- student. I'm going to be honest with you. That's like a student who goes into school and says, you know what, teacher, I want a D-. I don't give me an F. I'm going to shoot. What grade are you aiming for? I'm aiming for that D-, because that's going to get me to the next grade. As if I get if I get all D-, I'm ready to go to the next grade because I didn't fail, and I can just continue my entire, college education, high school education with a bunch of D- across the board. That's the type of person who restricts themselves to that bare minimum, and that should not be the case. It should not be the case because we have to understand that there are other responsibilities on our wealth to be able to give in good causes. So, inshallah, time is up, but we have to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in this surah that we have to be careful about allowing our wealth, or if you don't even have that much wealth, the desire for wealth, to prevent it from be careful, do not let it distract you away from this purpose in life, and that is to strive for the akhirah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us and guide us at all times and in all things we do. Ameen. Astaghfirullah li wa lakum wa li sa'iril muslimin fastaghfiruhu innahu huwal ghafurur rahim. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. So we talked a lot about takathur, this desire of, how this desire of wanting more and more distracts you. But if it's not sufficient for us to understand that, then we have to realize that there are ramifications in this life as well. And I'll conclude with this. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, لَيْسَ الْغِنَى عَنْ كَثْرَةِ الْعَرَضِ. He said that wealth or richness is not measured by having a lot of possessions. Being wealthy is not measured by having a lot of material possessions. He said, وَلَكِنَّ الْغِنَى غِنَى النَّفْسِ. He said that true wealth is redefining standards for us. True wealth is contentment of the heart. Having contentment with the things that you have is going to bring you more wealth and more benefit than having all these possessions and you not being happy with them. And there are so many people who have so many possessions and they live absolutely miserable lives, even in this life, let alone the next life. Even in this life, they live miserable lives. They have a miserable family condition. They achieve nothing. They're not happy with the expensive car that they have. They're not happy with the expensive $1 million, $2 million, $3 million house that they have, or $10 million house, or whatever it is. They don't have any satisfaction in their life, yet they have all these material things. And the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that in reality, all these things, we define it as wealth, but wealth is supposed to bring you some type of satisfaction. Wealth is supposed to be able to buy you something that will make you happy. That's why people strive after wealth. And he says people who have wealth, there are many of them, they don't even have that despite having this abundance of physical, material possessions. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us in the wealth that we have. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our hearts. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not let us get distracted by these things away from the akhirah. Oh Allah, we ask your help in all things we do. Oh Allah, accept our fasting. Oh Allah, accept our prayers. Oh Allah, accept our deeds this Ramadan. Oh Allah, make us generous people and do not make us among the miserly. Oh Allah, give us a sufficient sustenance which will sustain us. Oh Allah, do not make us fall into poverty, and do not test us more than we can bear. Oh Allah, help us and guide us at all times and in all things we do. Ameen. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. I have 3 announcements, so just wait 1 second, inshallah. First announcement is we have a backpack and school supply drive that we're giving to elementary and high school students from low-income families. You can put your things in, we have a bin in the lobby, so you can drop off your items until the 16th of June, inshallah. Second announcement is that last week we did a fundraising to cover the expenses only for Ramadan. And the reality of that was, what we collected last week, we did not even cover the electricity and security costs for the month of Ramadan. So please take that into consideration, and in consideration what we talked about, and help sponsor those things. And lastly, Zakat al-Fitr, what's called Fitra. We have some boxes outside. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, basically this is something that every single Muslim, where the box is right there, right? So the box is right there. This is something that every single Muslim who's generally somewhat well off has to be paying, and the amount is $10 to $20. You can put 20, if you can only give 10 is 10. There's a flexible amount there. So $10 to $20 on behalf of every single person in your family. It's very important to give it before the day of Eid. It's due on the day of Eid before the prayer, but it's important to give it before so we can distribute it to the right people, because otherwise it's very hard to distribute it, inshallah. So keep that in mind as well. Aqim as-salah.